Chapter 6, Secular Jewish Choruses, the sixth in a series of podcasts on the history and nature of Jewish choral music. In this chapter, we will look at the rise of secular Jewish choruses in St. Petersburg, Russia. A cultural phenomenon was developing in St. Petersburg. Of course, nationalism, both cultural and political, had been on the rise throughout Europe. Nationalism had its musical manifestation as well. For some Jews, Jewishness was exclusively a religious identity. This was most prevalent in the circles of Reform Judaism in Western Europe, as well as among many of the Orthodox Jews of Eastern Europe. But other Jews, inspired by nationalist movements in Eastern Europe, and having discarded much of their religious practice and theology, were eager to explore and assert their cultural identity as a distinct minority. Among the most prominent Russian Jewish nationalist composers were Joseph Achron, Joel Engel, Mikhail Ganisin, Alexander Karain, Solomon Rozovsky, Lazar Saminsky, Ephraim Shkliar, and Alexander Veprik. Some European Christians viewed the Jews as a nation within a nation. They regarded Jewishness as an exotic Oriental strain. Jews were considered the Asiatics of Europe, or the internal Oriental. Here's an excerpt from the diary of Franz Liszt. Only once we witnessed what a real Judaic art could be if the Israelites would have poured out their suppressed passions and sentiments and revealed the glow of their fire in the art forms of their Asiatic genius, in its full pomp and fantasy and dreams, that hot fire which they kept so carefully hidden. And Maurice Ravel wrote, I was attracted to the strange and haunting beauty of Jewish music. I felt almost as though I had been brought into a new musical world when a few authentic Jewish melodies were brought to my notice. I was so bewitched by the mysterious color and exotic charm of these melodies that for weeks I could not get this music out of my mind. Then my imagination was set aflame. And in the words of Russian composer Modest Mussorgsky, while in Odessa, I attended services at 2 synagogues, and I was in raptures. I clearly remember 2 Israelite themes, one sung by the cantor, the other by the temple choir, the latter in unison. I shall never forget them. And in fact, in 1874, Mussorgsky began to compose a dramatic cantata called Joshua, or Jesus Navin. The main theme was based on a Hasidic nigun, a Jewish devotional melody that he had overheard. Yada-dai-dai, yada-dai-dai, yada-dai-dai-dai-dai-dai-dai. One of the first composers of Jewish concert music was the Russian Jew Joel Engel, or Yuli Engel. Apparently, Joel Engel originally had no interest in Jewish music until a cathartic meeting in 1899 with Vladimir Stasov, a noted art critic and a leading proponent of Russian nationalism in art and music. Apparently, Stasov shouted at Engel, "Where is your national pride of being a Jew? Where is your national pride in the music of your own people?" Engel experienced an epiphany and took a profound interest in his Jewish musical roots. Engel wrote, "The Jewish melodies had appealed to me. I wrote them down and worked on them, not because I was a Jew, but for the very opposite reason, that is to say, because I wasn't enough of a Jew." As a result of growing urbanization, secularization, and acculturation, many Europeans began to worry that a treasure of regional folk practices would soon be irretrievably lost. In Eastern Europe, musicians such as Kodály and Bartók went to the countryside to record traditional melodies. These melodies were then written out in Western musical staff notation and published. Many of them became fodder for artistic arrangements, compositions for instruments and/or voices. A similar phenomenon was at play in the Jewish communities of Eastern Europe. In 1898, Pesach Marek and Saul Ginsberg undertook an expedition to collect Jewish folk melodies. In November of 1900, Pesach Marek and Joel Engel gave an illustrated lecture on Jewish folk music at the Moscow Polytechnic Museum. It was officially sponsored by Russia's Imperial Society for Natural Science, Anthropology, and Ethnography. A year later, in 1901, Marek and Ginsberg's Jewish Folk Songs in Russia was published, a volume containing 376 of the songs that they had collected. Only the lyrics were printed, though, not the musical notation. And then another Jewish ethnographic expedition was mounted beginning in the year 1911. Ansky and Engel traveled through the villages of Volnya and Podolia and gathered material and artifacts for the Jewish Historic Ethnographic Society. Then a major catalyst occurred. Russian composer Nikolai Rimsky-Korsakov was teaching a composition class at the St. Petersburg Conservatory of Music in 1902. One of his students, Ephraim Shklyar, a young Jew from Minsk, submitted to the teacher an art song using as its lyrics a Yiddish poem by Yaffe entitled Fahren Obshet. Rimsky-Korsakov was so taken by the Yiddish song, he turned to Sklyar and exclaimed, "Write another 30 things like this and you will found a new school of composition." Then he addressed the Jewish students in the class. "Why do you imitate European and Russian composers? The Jews possess tremendous folk treasures. I myself have heard some of your religious songs and they have made a deep impression on me. Think about it, yes. Jewish music awaits her Jewish Glinka." Then in 1908, a group of young musicians, including many of the St. Petersburg Conservatory alumni, founded the Society for Jewish Folk Music. The Society's logo was featured on the covers of the music that they had published. Note the columns from the temple in Jerusalem. The six-branched flowering menorah, the candelabrum, split at the top. The six-pointed Star of David. The harp of Zion, framed with stylized shofarot, ram's horns, the Lion of Judah, and the deer, each sprouting wings. The Yiddish text on the cover is Gesellschaft für Jiddische Volksmusik in Petersburg, the Society for Jewish Folk Music in St. Petersburg. Here is an excerpt from the charter of the Society. The goals of the Society for Jewish Folk Music are to cooperate in the learning and development of Jewish folk music, both synagogal and secular, through collecting examples of folk creations, reworking them artistically and disseminating them among the society, and to support Jewish composers and other musicians. In order to achieve the stated goals, the Society will publish and cooperate so that others will publish musical works and theoretical works on Jewish musical topics. Will organize musical gatherings, concerts, operatic performances, lectures, etc. Will have its own chorus and orchestra. Will have a library of sheet music and books about the musical art. Will publish a journal dedicated to Jewish music, and will hold competitions for musical works by Jewish composers. Between 1908 and 1918, the Society enlisted over 400 members, published over 80 new compositions, and presented over 150 concerts. In 1914, the St. Petersburg Society for Jewish Folk Music sponsored publication of this collection of choral music for three-part treble chorus. The title page is written in Yiddish with some Hebrew translation. It says, in effect, a collection of songs for school and family, 85 songs for a three-part choir with piano accompaniment, collected by Kisselgoff, arranged by Zhitomirsky and Lvov, third edition, sponsored by the Petersburg Society for Jewish Music and published by the Yuval Verlagsgesellschaft für Jüdische Musik, Berlin. The table of contents of this book reveals 92 compositions. There were 12 traditional liturgical chants, 45 arrangements of secular folk songs, 5 wordless devotional songs, 23 of what they called künstlerische Lieder, classical songs by composers such as Beethoven, Rubinstein, Mussorgsky, Glinka, Mendelssohn, Saint-Saëns, and Mozart, all arranged by the editors and retexted into Hebrew or Yiddish. And part 5 was a transcription of some traditional biblical cantillation. Here you see a folk song, Der Eberste ist der Mechuten, arranged by Zhitomirsky. It is a strophic song. The lyrics to the other 2 verses are found elsewhere in the anthology. And here you can see one of the künstlerische Lieder, also a strophic song. Can you recognize the source of this music? Joel Engel's greatest choral work may be his Opus 9, Uvi nad brzegam Jordana. The lyrics by Apollon Mayakov reflect the Jewish yearning for the ancient homeland. Alas, above the shores of the Jordan River, the sunlight of former days has dimmed. Like the mysterious forest of Lebanon, a temple without prayers or candles. The inspired lutes cannot be heard, and the striking sound of the drum is silenced. The strings of the sacred lyres are broken. A time of tears and pain has come. But you, O Lord, in a covenant with the forefathers have said, I will not abandon my people. He who sows bitter tears will reap a harvest of joy. When will you loudly call the sad sons soon to battle banners? Those fleet-winged warriors for revenge against their violent enemies. When will Israel shake off the ashes from its tired head? When will the cymbals ring out again? And when will she sing out with the sound of harps? In Chapter 7, we will look at choral music that reflected the Jewish experience of the Nazi Holocaust.